Does the approaches of green architecture or green design also has a limit in its application, whether it be in terms of conservation, efficiency, and mitigation? So what are the challenges?
Here, I'll go first.
Sure
And
thing.
again, this time I refer to the response of architect Humang in relation to obsolescence. So that addresses this question precisely. There is, for example, a philosophy now regarding uh, instead of a cradle to the grave paradigm, we there's a school of thought now in relation to a cradle to cradle perspective in the development of, say, the design of an object. So if you can expand on that, for example, in terms of green architecture, then that might be a good way to go. You're using a paradigm elsewhere that you can use in green architecture. Uh, Indeed, there are limits, but I guess that is also a question of how do we challenge ourselves to uh, lengthen the life of anything, the structures that we build, the designs that we actually use. Probably that should be a consideration there. Architect Yumang also mentioned, for example, the extent by which we use concrete. And we do have alternatives to concrete, for example. Uh, there are other materials that we can use, if only to also address the question of, let's say, a threat to the amount of sand, for example, that we use. So even before we reach that stage, again, you go back to the point of sustainability. Even before we reach that point, it may be good to actually already identify very good alternatives already. So to the materials that we use, to the designs that we have, to the principles that we follow, the policies, for example, that often more often than not would be the last aspect of designs, for example, that become up to date. So that there has to be a progressive aspect to how we move forward in that area. And architects generally can, as a profession, can actually serve as an influence on how laws and policies should be pursued.
To answer that question, Jonathan, um, let's say, for example, that we are building a house, no, for example, and this house, we are not thinking of what will happen at the end of its life cycle. 50 years, 100 years, for example. We don't really bother about it. But if nagpalit ng may-ari along the way, namatay yung tunay na may-ari, no? Pinamana niya sa mga anak, and I don't want this structure anymore, I'm going to destroy it, gigibain ko na yan, and then yung semento na ginawa natin, panambak na lang, right? So, if we will think of a much valuable life cycle or value chain along this model, what if we create prefab models, all screwable, all model, customized models? Yung model na yan, ang gagawin natin is like, pwede mo siyang palitan, ang papalitan mo lang is the screw, kasi nabulok na siya. And then the wood can be used into something else. No? Now, of course, this will incur cost, right? But we need to balance, we need to outweigh. If you're going to change it, if you're going to regenerate the structure, it will give you a new value for your property, right? Rather than ang isang property nagde-depreciate every year, right? So, in real estate principle, yung obsolescence, no? Ang tendency niyan is when the more you reach that age, bumababa yung kanyang value. So what I'm trying to do is, bago dumating doon sa age na yon, just like what the Japanese are doing, no? The Japanese are doing, every after 50 years or 25 years, they will rebuild yung kanilang structure, yung kanilang traditional structure. That is number one, because of the transfer of technology, transfer of information, for example, yung craft nila. No? In fact, we have vanishing trades, no? Solihiya, yung wood joineries, etc. These are the ones, kaya wala tayong craftsmen eh. di ba? Our craftsmen, our workers are there just to earn every day, pero they are not really crafts people, right? And so this is what I am advocating. We want to spread livelihood to people who knows these things. In fact, I'm going to develop a seminar for Solihiya. I'm going to use that as my facade. I'm going to use that as my um, skin for architecture. And that skin co-collaborate with the habitat, no? With the habitat of the fireflies, no? So I'm creating parametricism not because of the shape. That's not just for the pure joy of human eye, but because I want to increase the habitat of the living organisms. So that's the very purpose. So I am coexisting. I co-thrive with other living organisms. Dapat maging healthy sila. And did you know? Did you know that if you exceed yung lighting at night, nawawala yung mga living organisms diyan. Ang ganda-ganda tingnan para sa tao, right? Pero the animals, the living organisms, they move away from humans because for them, we are a threat. We are predators, right? Pero when I tried turning off the lights, all of the fireflies are around us, no? So these are the kind of thinking that architects are, I think, mali yung pananaw natin doon, no? Akala natin kung ano maganda sa atin, maganda sa environment. Wrong. That is because what is order for us is chaos to nature. What is order for nature is chaos for humans, no? So we have to be very careful. If you want to design with nature, you don't just copy them. You live with nature. You live with.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that the greenest structure is probably the bahay kubo. And right now, hindi na nga pwede. Aside of course from, yun nga, iba na yung setting and everything, kahit na gusto mo siguro, you are limited with the resources available. Wala na tayong mga materials. So perhaps right now, what we can do is come up with our own with what is available. So it's very challenging because it entails a lot of research and development, but it is possible. So yun nga, we can just use whatever it is that we have and learn how to design yung pinakamaganda with the limitations that we have.
Yeah, so I think investing more on research, especially in our profession, in the built environment, is really important because nowadays not a lot of people do research. Eh.
Yes. On green architecture, of course, yeah, there are limits and boundaries in green architecture. If nature has limitations, definitely, everything has its own limits and boundaries now. And I think one of the limits of green architecture is that it is contextual based. Okay, what is green in here in the Philippines? For example, you have this set of strategies to combat heat island or stormwater, or perhaps how to make water efficient structure or buildings. Some of these strategies cannot be adopted in other areas because if the building is located in an area na maraming supply ng tubig, so why are you going to incorporate water efficient design strategies kasi hindi na siya efficient, no? So it's more of contextual based. I think the limitation is that green architecture should be adapted to local context, and of course, I think the limits is that we have to understand Earth's operating conditions so that we know the bounds and limits of what our the design thinking, of sustainability. Marami kasi ito in nature, of course, sunlight, water, gravity. These are some of the resources that you can get in nature that you can incorporate in your building. Okay? These are our limitations. So how are we going to leverage those limits? And in nature, it's always cyclic. Minsan kung ano yung na-produce ng waste directly on the spot can be a source of raw material for other species, for example. So perhaps we can metaphorically follow the same. Kung meron tayong waste on our building, on the spot, we recycle them. Hindi na natin siya itatapon, hindi na natin siya I mean, hindi na natin siya itatransfer pa sa ibang lugar to create that cyclic processes. If nature is doing it, so why can't we?
Yeah.
So I think it's more of the contextual. Green architecture is more of context based.
Yes, definitely. So also like as a young I mean I'm not yet an architect, but like as a young person like me, I think what's really um bad about now is that we're so blinded by the illusion of like Western architecture, even if wala naman sa context, we keep on like copying them, and we even try to make them contextual, even if in the first place they're not really contextual at all because they're in a different era.